Hi guys, this is Taylor and I'm here today with my November wrap-up. I did the do. I did Nonfiction November all this month and was pretty successful, I think. I read 4 books, same as October, so I feel good about that, and especially good about having knocked the first book off my TBR. So, the first book that I read, or I should say finished in November, is Black Mountain, An Exploration in Community by Martin Duberman. It is very exciting for me to have finished this because I'm not even kidding you when I say that I've probably been reading this on and off for maybe 2 years. So Black Mountain College in North Carolina was a school of alternative education from about the 1930s to the 50s. It was alternative and experimental in that it placed a huge emphasis on the arts, the visual arts, music, and writing. And because of that, it produced like a disproportionate amount of successful artists and writers, especially poets. I've always been drawn to Black Mountain as a concept, so I was really eager to learn more about it in depth. But as expected, this book totally dismantled the idea that Black Mountain was anything like the utopian community that I was imagining. Some really unforgivable, messed up things happened at Black Mountain, and one of the things that this book did a great job of was not shying away from talking about the college's faults. On the other hand, I didn't really like how this book was organized. It jumped around a lot chronologically, which made it pretty hard to follow for me. And also this book focused a lot, like 95% on the personalities associated with Black Mountain and not so much on like the daily life of living and learning there, which is what I was most interested in. I have a lot of thoughts about this book, probably because I read it for 2 years, but for the sake of this wrap up, I'll just say that I'm definitely glad that I read this book, and I'm glad that I informed myself about this utopian ideal that I once thought of it as. But the book itself I thought was so-so, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. The next book I read in November was Without You, There Is No Us, My Time with the Sons of North Korea's Elite by Suki Kim. So this is the memoir of a Korean-American woman who is hired to teach English at an elite university in North Korea, thus giving her a very rare glimpse into the country itself, but an even rarer opportunity to interact personally with many young elite North Korean men. I had heard some mediocre things about the way that this book reads, but honestly my first thought and my primary thought while reading this was of how well I thought the narrative flowed. I was constantly impressed that no matter where I picked this book back up, it was immediately readable and compelling, and it always drew me right back in. So I really enjoyed the experience of reading this book, and I also thought that the information in it was very useful. There was definitely introductory information available for people like myself who aren't the most knowledgeable about the history of North and South Korea. Suki Kim also did a great job of conveying her experiences, especially the sense of isolation present in North Korea and the toll that it takes on the psyche. I'm really glad to have read this book. I'm glad to know what I know now, and I would totally recommend this if you're interested in getting a brief glimpse into North Korea. And in the end I gave this 4 stars. So then I picked up Sexuality, A Very Short Introduction by Véronique Mathieu. This is part of a giant series published by Oxford. There are hundreds of these on pretty much any subject that you can think of. But first things first, something I wish I would have known before picking this up, and probably even before purchasing this, is that it was published in 2008. And a lot has happened within studies of gender and sexuality since 2008. This read is pretty dated when it comes to inclusion of terms that we use now, and even sometimes just the language that we use when discussing certain aspects of sexuality nowadays. Oxford does go back and issue updated editions of this series, and I definitely think this is an entry that would be benefited by a 2nd edition. Other than that though, I thought a majority of the information offered here was useful. I definitely learned some things about the history of sexuality as a concept, but I ultimately think that this book's strength in 2017 are the sections that talked more about the historical aspects of sexuality. So I ended up giving this 3 stars. It's obviously not the book's fault that it was written in 2008. Would love to read a hypothetical 2nd edition of this. And the last thing I read in Nonfiction November was Little Soldiers, An American Boy, a Chinese School, and the Global Race to Achieve by Eleanor Chu. That's not her name. By Lenora Chu. You may notice at this point that I read 3 books on like comparative education or education in some way this month. I didn't even notice until I was about halfway through this book. I don't know, it must have been a hot topic for me this month. So this is written by a Chinese American journalist who is raising her son in China and is using that experience to investigate the pros and cons of both the Chinese education system and the American education system. It's kind of hard to review this book as a Westerner because the first few chapters are very critical of the Chinese education system and they're presented in a very jarring way. But I know that I'm obviously biased as someone who grew up in the American education system. But ultimately, I think this book did a great job of delineating the pros and cons of both systems. It's very eye-opening, even about things like Western education and even Western democracy. And on top of the information presented, of the 4 books that I read this month, this one was the most conversational in its tone, and it gave the most anecdotes, which really helps me when reading nonfiction. The only thing was, I kind of wish it did offer a little bit more of a blueprint as to how we can integrate the pros of both systems and reap the benefits of both. Like how we could get American kids more interested in science and technology, and how to integrate things like more choice and creativity into the Chinese education system. But ultimately this was a 4-star read. I thought it was great. But that was everything I read in November. Feel free to let me know how your November went. Did you read nonfiction? Did you say suck it nonfiction? Let me know. And I hope you're having a great day and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!